Your seats.
Working with Jeffrey and his team for a few years here, trying to just practice fight boxing.
Okay, we'd like to bring the CSRIC meeting to order, please. Good afternoon, everybody. I understand we have a quorum here today, and then we also have about a dozen people on the phone. When it comes time to vote, those of you on the phone, we're gonna try to get your votes as well. We've got a very full schedule here, and we've got two voting recommendations that we're going to do today. And since we last met in December, we've kicked off the working group, which will address cybersecurity issues. And I'd like Robert Mayer to raise his hand. I just met him. There he is, Robert, with the U.S. Telecom Association. And we'd like to thank Robert for leading that group. So, and one other last item. In June, our June meeting, we are going to be targeting 5 to 6 recommendations. So it'll be a very busy meeting. And I just want to thank everyone for all the hard work that you've been doing. There's been enormous activity, enormous progress, and I look forward to hearing from everybody here today. So the first item on the agenda, I'm going to turn the call over to Jeff.
Thanks, Larissa, and I'll add my welcome to everybody here. We seem to always have these meetings at auspicious moments. Today is the first day of spring. And also, it's shortly after St. Patrick's Day, and you've got a green tie on, which is quite...
behind time. We had a snow day.
Yeah. Right. So thank you all for coming and joining us today. I just want to officially convene the meeting, and I will... Larissa, do you have...
I kind of said it. I preempted you, so you can just turn it over to the chairman.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for that glowing introduction. It's great to be back with you. This is my second time with CSRIC since becoming chairman, and I really appreciate all of the work that you are doing. Larissa, when I hear people talking about taking votes, that's fabulous, because that's results. And that's what, this, I'm going to turn that off. Senator Warner, who, as many of you know, did quite well in the mobile phone business, used to always, during stump speeches, when a phone would go off in the audience, people would kind of, somebody really wants to talk to me, people would go all a titter, and he would say, "Oh no, this isn't bad, this and that. Don't worry. To you, it may be a nuisance. You may hear a ring. To me, it's the sound of a cash register." And so those of us here at the commission, even when we're bothered or interrupted by mobile devices, it's a result of this brave new world that we're helping to build here, and that is creating some of the challenges that you have to deal with. How's that for a segue, folks, huh? Oh, okay. Thank goodness that person called and gave it to me. What you're doing is important stuff. It's why I'm particularly glad to go back to what I was saying to Larissa about votes, actions, decisions, moving on. That's what we're counting on you for. This, and I think it's going to get more demanding, because we're going to start asking you not just for input or not just for a report. We're going to start asking you to be a multi-stakeholder tool attacking a very critical issue, cybersecurity. And beyond that, being a demonstration of the fact that this kind of industry-based, multi-stakeholder approach can produce results. And that's a decision an outcome that is still in doubt, being debated. And so we are at a critical juncture. We know there are threats. We know there are growing threats. We know that there are voluntary and industry-based solutions. The question is, will they work? And the answer is, they must. And the bigger answer is, you all are on the cutting edge of making sure that happens. Admiral Simpson has been introducing me to a bunch of new phrases that he's picked up over his career, but his favorite one that I've noticed in the last week or 10 days is the term torque. And he's always talking about, we got to have more torque on this. I don't know if this is a Navy propulsion kind of a thing or what, but we got to have more torque.
It can't just be RPMs.
It can't just be RPMs. It's got to be torque. Okay. And you have, and so he's been saying to me, we're going to get more torque out of CSRIC. Now, you all have just produced 2 significant reports from working groups. You've got another one coming up that we're looking forward to, the BAS report and the Legacy Network Reliability report. But following the Admiral's admonition, it's time to add more torque, and that means turn to cyber. We're proud of what you did in your last effort to deal with this. What you did with secure routing, DNSSEC, botnets, demonstrated that the multi-stakeholder process can deliver solutions. It's now time, I think I said it the last time that we were together, to make sure that we're measuring the results of those kinds of solutions. And it is now also time to launch a new working group on cyber best practices to update the current best practices in light of what NIST has been doing with their cybersecurity framework, and then to focus that updating of best practices on implementation. NIST did a great public-private effort to come up with the cyber framework, and it falls to us now to move beyond that. So Robert Mayer, who I just met before the meeting, thank you to you for taking the leadership on the working group to drive this forward. And to Donna Dotson. Donna, are you here? There's Donna. To Donna Dotson, for your willingness to step up and be a senior advisor to all of these activities. And working with the National Security Council staff is Samara Moore here. Well, appreciate the support that we've been getting from her and the NSS staff. The essence of what the President's cyber executive order does is to instruct federal agencies, including ours, to take certain specified steps, but to empower the industry to lead the way. And now we have to do that, and CSRIC is the forum. And the kinds of issues that we're asking you to deal with, we recognize are non-trivial. We're talking about corporate governance, we're talking about risk management, we're talking about how we have measurement metrics, we're talking about accountability and assurance. And we're also talking about building a new regulatory paradigm. If this works, and I want to say when this works, but the importance is it must work because it will establish, as I say, this new regulatory model to prove that overt regulation is unnecessary. This is a new model for this building. This is a new model for government. The stakes are high. My expectations are high. What I'm counting on the Admiral and Larissa to deliver here, I recognize, is non-trivial. We're talking about nothing less than the security of the networks that drive the 21st century. That's a damn big deal. If we don't have security in those networks, I don't have to tell you what the consequences are. But the kind of growth trajectory that this economy needs to be on will be thwarted. The rights of individuals will be threatened. And we'll be in serious travail. But it can be resolved, I believe, and I believe it can be resolved with the structure that sits at this table. This new regulatory model. I've been saying to the Admiral and others here at the FCC that we have to understand that we are not as smart as the Internet. That the old regulatory model was you pretty much knew what was going on. You pretty much knew what was coming down the line. Things were pretty siloed. And it wasn't hard then to make decisions that were definitive on the operation of each of those silos. Well, today, as you know, there are no silos. And 3 guys and a dog in a garage are making what we consider today to be standard obsolete. How do you keep pace with that? You don't keep pace with that with a top-down kind of approach. You keep pace through the kind of multi-stakeholder process that we're talking about here. But it has to work, because if it doesn't work, the alternatives are not attractive. They're not attractive to the regulated companies. They're not attractive to the impact in terms of how you keep pace, how you stay nimble with changes. So we have to make this work. We need dispatch, we need determination, and we need focus on results. And CSRIC is the vehicle for that. So I want to end where I began by saying thank you to all of you. This is not one of those committees that you get to put on your resume or in your bio that says, look, I'm making contributions. I go in and I consult and I produce reports and this sort of thing. This is a committee that needs to deal with some serious, pressing, dangerous, important issues, and to do it in a new model. So we're grateful to you. I have huge faith in Admiral Simpson and his team. And Larissa, I look forward to coming back for more votes out of Working Group 4, establishing the kind of priorities and the kind of measurements that will help us build this new model. So thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to all of you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so next on the agenda, we're going to have, actually, aren't you next on the agenda? Rear Admiral Dave Simpson. Didn't have my glasses with me at that moment.
Thank you, Larissa. And let me also thank Robert and Donna and those of you that have stepped up to leadership positions within the CSRIC. When the chairman and I first arrived at the FCC in November, I followed him by a couple of weeks last year. The chairman told me that these are important days in determining the future of our networks and their effect on our commerce and our culture. And he couldn't have more accurately and stridently reiterated the same today. This is a very important year. The work of the CSRIC is very important to assuring that as we go forward, that our networks continue to be the source of innovation, but also have security and privacy balanced in a way that protects those communications that are increasingly now IP, that are reliant on that underlying infrastructure, that have to be there in an emergency, that have to be there in a really bad day. It's through the hard work and efforts of those on the CSRIC that we are shaping the future of our networks for the better. Today, the Council will vote on recommendations from 2 CSRIC working groups. The first vote will be on Working Group 3's report on the emergency alert system. This group was asked to review current FCC rules and to recommend any actions that the FCC should take to improve EAS security. It reviewed a variety of issues, including how the selection and administration of state emergency communications councils can be improved and how the councils may develop and submit state EAS plans for the Commission review in a manner that optimizes the efficiency and effectiveness of the EAS and imposes minimal burden on stakeholders. This is a good example of an area that illustrates it really is a multi-stakeholder environment. It's important that we recognize that, and we don't have jurisdiction over it all, but we have jurisdiction over a part of it, and the ability to convene via the CSRIC all of the relevant stakeholders to get after the part that really needs to be done to ensure that these critical public safety services are available when needed. The Council will also vote on a recommendation from Working Group 7's report. The group is charged with reviewing existing best practices that apply to legacy communications in light of changes in technology and trends in reliability. In addition, in light of a large-scale fiber cut incident last year, we asked Working Group 7 to address possible best practices involving, of all things, manholes. The covers in the streets that keep so much of the underlying veins and arteries of our communication systems protected, and we're anxious to see today's recommendation on that. We will also hear updates from working groups tackling a wide range of topics, including next generation 911 and wireless emergency alerting, submarine cable landing sites, infrastructure sharing, CPE powering, distributed denial of service attack remediation, and core internet protocol improvements. These are difficult issues, and I can't thank all of these groups enough for their ongoing hard work. As the chairman mentioned, today marks the formal initiation of Working Group 4, which will study cybersecurity best practices. I, too, want to take a few minutes to highlight the role of this group's efforts in light of the NIST cybersecurity framework, its charge, and the significance of its work on cybersecurity efforts within the communications sector. The NIST framework is intended to allow organizations, regardless of size, degree of cyber risk, or cybersecurity sophistication, to apply the principles and best practices of risk management to improve the security and resilience of critical infrastructure. So I want to stress that variety, that range of cybersecurity sophistication, because most of the participants here come from companies, organizations with a high degree of cybersecurity sophistication. We all work, though, with and sell to and partner with organizations that don't necessarily have that same high degree of cybersecurity sophistication. And the axiom that's often used is risk shared by one is risk shared by all. We've got to have a better way of communicating across that spectrum of cybersecurity readiness about risk. and at its core, I believe the cybersecurity framework will do that. Organizations can use the framework to determine their current level of cybersecurity, set goals for cybersecurity that are in sync with their business environment, and establish a plan for improving or maintaining their cybersecurity. It also offers a methodology to protect privacy and civil liberties to help organizations incorporate these protections into a comprehensive cybersecurity program. It does not get into the SANS 20 internal controls and tell you how you should be or where you should be putting firewalls in your organization. It does not tell you how you should be detecting anomalies and resolving those. It brings the conversation up to where the chairman described is really potentially a new regulatory paradigm where we're not micromanaging, but we're working with you together to appropriately manage risk across the sector. And yet the framework is only a first step in a continuous process to improve the nation's cybersecurity. As Chairman Wheeler remarked when the framework was released last month, now the next phase of hard work begins. It's time to operationalize the framework within the communications sector to keep America's information economy strong. That's the charge to Working Group 4. To assess and update cybersecurity's best practices that communication sector companies can use to evaluate their own cybersecurity posture and to identify needs and expectations both internally and with external stakeholders. Folks, this is a tall order, but Working Group 4's chair, Robert Mayer of U.S. Telecom, has assembled a stellar team across all segments of the communications sector to tackle and deliver on this charge. Donna Dodson has agreed to provide technical advice that will really ensure there's a continuity to the great work that was done by DHS and NIST and many of you all in the standard development. The work plan involves reviewing hundreds of CSRIC security best practices to bring them into alignment with the framework and exploring aspects of a business environment in which cybersecurity specific practices will be effective, efficient, and sustainable. Strengthening executive and board level knowledge of and commitment to the cybersecurity risk management processes outlined in the framework is absolutely critical. If this work doesn't resonate in boardrooms, we haven't done the work right. It needs to, in the future, drive investment in the communications sector, but quite frankly, investment in other sectors as then they take their lead off what this sector does. And that's important to recognize that this work will contribute to the multi-stakeholder utilization of the framework and enable that communication of risk and remediation constructively with your consumers, with your partners, and with the government charged with understanding that risk. Lastly, Working Group 4 will examine any barriers to implementation of cybersecurity best practices and recommend actions that the Commission can take to help mitigate those barriers. I'm excited about the updates we will hear about today and the new work to be undertaken by the CSRIC. This is a diverse set of issues, but they all play a role in ensuring that our nation has a secure, reliable, and resilient communications infrastructure, and that in turn promotes economic growth and helps keep Americans safer. Thank you for taking on this responsibility by dedicating your time and expertise. Your recommendations are important to the FCC and to the country. This has been an extremely busy yet very productive quarter, and I look forward to hearing about your progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to go right to the working group presentations. The first is the Emergency Alert System. Richard Redmond, State of Washington. Richard.
Okay, is there a slide controller handy?
You're looking at her.
Oh, okay.
She is.
Marvelous. Okay, great. Okay, first of all, I want to say that I'm not from the state of Washington. I'm from the state of California. And Clay Freinwald, who is the chair and fearless leader of our group on the Plans Committee, could not be here today. And Larry Walk from NAB, who is the co-chair of that effort, also could not be here today. So I have been, I'm here. And I'm going to try to go through the slide deck we came up with. And we're going to start right now because briefly, before I get into the slide deck, you've heard about the objectives of what we're doing, but this was a very interesting process that involved over 40 people from a lot of different disciplines within broadcasting and media content delivery. And to get a group like this to actually agree on the report that's being presented to you today was not easy, but it showed incredible flexibility from all participants to be able to get us to that point. And I want to thank all of the people that participated in that process. Some of them are in the room, but it was a great learning experience. We taught and learned from each other. The screen's a little bit far away. I can't even read the slide. But
yeah, you might want to do not have one here.
Yeah, right.
We're having a hard time reading it too.
Right. Okay. I can get my laptop out.
Can you make each section a little bit bigger?
Okay.
Yeah, I was just.
Yeah, right.
That's on my list.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Can we? Okay. Great. Okay. We're good. Okay.
I'll just comply.
Okay. Actually, I can blame Larry. I can blame Larry Walk for this because he added a couple of slides to the presentation that I did. So okay. But Lynn, you can deliver my blame. Okay. Basically, our working group 3 had a three tasks split up among subgroups: state EAS plans, nationwide EAS test, and then EAS security. I'm here to talk about the plans report that you're considering today. We had 42 members within our group that were participated in our calls, which we had weekly calls of duration of an hour to sometimes 2 hours or more. And obviously the type here is too small, but it's in the report, and you'll see that. And again, we actually wound up with an extra co-chair to our effort, Gary Tim, who's the state chair for the Wisconsin Emergency Alert System Committee. Clay Freinwald, as I said, Rich Parker from Vermont Public Radio, and myself. This is our final report, and we pretty much stuck to our charge. We went a little bit beyond it in some cases, but we pretty much stuck to it. We reviewed the rules and made some recommendation for changes in best practices. We suggested a better process for development and submission of EAS plans to the Commission by committees. We also looked at the process of plan review that the Commission does to oversee the whole EAS structure. And then we also offered guidance suggestions to SECCs to help them in their work. But wait, there's more. We basically dug into the construction of state plans and looked at key elements that could make them more uniform while still allowing some flexibility for states that basically need to make their own decisions because one size does not fit all. We identified the core plan elements that should be deliverables to the FCC. And then we provided specific examples of how to do this in our appendices. Appendix 1 has descriptive language on adapting the state plans. We have suggestions in how SECCs can themselves do some testing to assure propagation, reliability of messages. And we presented our vision of how the maintenance of the plans can be accomplished. So we do have the appendices that are in the report. I really don't want to go into a lot of detail. It's all there for you to read. Hopefully you stayed up late last night and read it all. But in red, we have at the bottom probably one of our key recommendations in the report, that we recommend that the FCC stand up an online database that can automatically cross-reference specific information with the FCC's universal licensing system. This is a biggie if it can be done. And basically, we want to give the government a way to monitor, to carry out some of the assurance that we heard the Admiral and the Chairman talk about, that is really part of the core CSRIC charge, to be able to make sure that things work. We think that if this database is set up properly, it would obviously have secure and authorized pieces to it to make that happen. So it would help with the assurance that these important messages for last-ditch communications in event of major failures to the communication infrastructure can take place. Then we also get into a standardized format for this. And again, we believe that this secure database can help the state committees do their work better. Biggie here, we recognize the Commission does not have the resources to do this for a state-by-state basis. And really, as part of our mandate at the state level, we're going to have to step up and do this. We can't really just push this back on the Commission to do. And the other fact of life that we dealt with in all our deliberations is there's less than 100% certainty that all 50 states and territories are capable of fully supporting this effort at this time. We think that our recommendations could help, though. We actually got into some specific Part 11 changes for the EAS rules here. I'll go through them very briefly. We think that the map book was originally called for in Part 11 still is in the rules. The time for that can go if the database recommendation is implemented. We did get into some recommendations that will obviously be part of rulemaking. That we can't ourselves go in and change Part 11, but we made recommendations for that. But basically, drop outdated and conflicting rules that we know exist. We want to clarify FEMA's PEP responsibilities within Part 11, and we think that we need to reconcile the EAS rules in various parts of Part 11, so that there's some clarity there and reducing confusion. We also provide a definition for what a State Emergency Communication Committee is, and more wording changes and monitoring assignments and how they're requested and approved. This is our definition for State Emergency Communications Committee, and it really is very open-ended and recognizes that for a federally driven EAN mandate, that there still has to be a consideration for individuality within how states carry out various practices that make this possible. But so this is an attempt to try to suggest what we could call these committees, because they really aren't defined right now in Part 11. And that's pretty much it as far as my presentation is concerned. And obviously, if is there a question time for this?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'll try to answer questions as best I can about this, if there are any. Yes.
Hi. I noticed that Appendix 2, there's a reference to specific language changes to Part 11 rules, and my draft didn't have anything in there. Is the final draft going to have language changes?
Well, we have in the appendix, the concordance that Gary Tim wrote, that is not it isn't in your package? I didn't get a copy of the package, so I don't know it was actually delivered to the committee. But the appendix We actually did a concordance of all of Part 11 sections where we wanted to look at. And we talked about them, as you know, at great length during the calls. Went through that document in some detail. That document should be in there. It was when I delivered it to Larry.
It was submitted before the document was finished, so that was the one that said to be filled in later, but there wasn't a second submission.
Okay, all right.
So we need to get the whole group the final version.
Okay, all right. That was Chris Plummer. He actually helped a lot with trying to get our report put into the CSRIC format. Thank you very much, Chris, for that. Any other questions?
Richard?
Yes?
So if I understand right, at the executive level, the database that you're proposing would help provide a more consistent, centralized accounting while preserving the decentralized execution and approval process within each of the states. But that centralized way of accounting for this should contribute positively in the long run towards efficiency within each of the states as we begin to reduce the variation that exists in the system today.
I'll give you a concrete example of how this can actually work. It's very important because state committees have other state committees next to us that we all know what we're doing. And we have, in the case of California, we actually have parts of California that are part of Nevada committees and vice versa. And having that central database will help everyone understand and make sure that we haven't let some monitoring aspects slip through the cracks.
That's helpful. Having grown up in California, there were times I wished I was part of Nevada, but I'm sure this will help.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Guess that's it. You can have your computer back.
I'll leave it here in case somebody else needs it. Okay, well, thank you very much, Richard. Before we go for the vote, we're going to have two groups voting: those of us who are in the room and those who are on the line. So, what I'd like to first know is, are people actually on the line? Can we hear them? If one person can just say, "Hey, we're here," that way we know the line is open. Nobody here? Are you're emailing people and they're on the line? Oh, yeah. So how are they going to vote?
Well, I think it's okay. We had a little problem at the very beginning of the call today.
Okay.
But I think it's cleared up and everything.
Okay. Well, we'll try and get their vote in a moment then. All right. Okay. So I'd like all of those who are here in the room who are in favor of the emergency alert system to raise their hand and say, yay? Yay. All right. Nay? Any nays? Any noes? No noes. Okay. I like that. All right. Those of you on the line, maybe we can get a vote here. I think instead of asking for yays, since I can't see anything, if you could just tell us if there's anybody who has a negative vote on the line. They're not answering, but we don't know if they can answer anyhow. Should they?
Some of them, yes. I'm getting.
Lauren, should they email you?
That's a really good question. To email. Well, look, Stacey is saying that she tried to speak and we didn't hear.
Let me see what I can do.
Yeah. So, and no negative votes.
No negative votes?
Well, that's what this says, but I don't know if they know.
It was one of 21 people who.
Oh, somebody else can hear them then. Somebody else. Is there somebody?
Maybe
else?
it's the same problem that Andy, you were talking about, is that they can hear each other, and maybe they're all having their own separate meeting and have decided there's no negative votes.
But we have a quorum here, right?
We have a quorum here.
All right.
And,
so we have a quorum that voted.
Larissa, maybe we could ask everybody just to be sure, if they could just email me their vote for this.
Okay,
deliverable.
that's
That would
good.
be constructive.
Those of you who are on the line, if you could just email Jeff, that would be great, Jeff Goldthorpe, and just let him know what your vote is. All right. The recommendations are approved for the emergency alert system. Next item on the agenda are legacy best practice updates, and Robin Howard from Verizon. Got a little bit of feedback.
Oh, yeah, Lauren's going to get that, except she's taking care of the other problem, so let me get this one. Here, Rob. Hey, Jeff. Here's Lauren.
Wonder if it's-
Yeah. Where's the vacant?
Oh,
We
interesting.
just came.
Okay. All right.
Okay, are we ready? Okay, let me get this set up real quick. There we go. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robin Howard, and I'm part of Working Group 7, working with Kyle Milady and the team. So I'll go ahead and give an update today on where we are, and also just kind of talk a little bit about the interim report that we just put out for your review for manhole security. So going to slide 2, this is our charter, just to remind everybody what Working Group 7 is doing. We are looking at legacy best practices, and these are best practices that have not been looked at in several years. And I'll give a little status update. It's a 2-part update today, where we are with the regular work, and then we'll cover the manhole security paper. Our working group has been asked to look at the legacy best practices and update those to this century. Also look at recommending any kind of best practice gaps that we might have found. Also, we're looking at best practices that have been sent over from the Alliance for Telecommunication Industry Solution, or ADIS team, that get worked on in between the CSRIC sessions, and then they come over here and we're taking a look at those, see how they tie in with what we're doing. And then again, the manhole security was a new item that was added late last year, and we're ready to present that for your vote today. So our current objectives, besides the manhole security paper, is we have a deliverable in September of 2014. This is a gap analysis of the existing best practices. We're looking at recommending changes to the existing set of best practices based on technology change, practice change, or observed reliability trends. We're looking at also considering the best practices from ADIS, and we do have several of those that we're looking at in conjunction with what our team was already working on. And then we also have a deliverable for March of 2015, and that is a review of the status column of all best practices, which was established in CSRIC 2 under Working Group 6. And we've been asked to take a look at the definitions and see if those can be updated or if they can be made better, or whatever the working group can come up with. Currently, we have 15 members on the working group, made up of folks from across the industry. Very good, solid team of experts in the best practice arena. So I think the ultimate deliverable in September is going to be a really good package. So give us a quick update on where we are with the legacy best practices, the workload. We have identified 476 best practices for evaluation. 275 of those fall in the area of network reliability, 176 under physical security, and 25 in the disaster recovery and mutual aid area. Our status that we've been working on since completing the manhole security paper, we are now about 57% complete of that review. We had a face-to-face meeting yesterday where we're reviewing the first 303 best practices that the team is trying to finalize for the final report. So far, we've identified 3 new best practices, 13 proposed deletions of out-of-date or best practices where we were able to combine them with other best practices or those types of scenarios. We've modified 283 best practices so far with wording and those types of updates, and then 3 we've found to be fine as written. Mostly we're finding changes in the wording of the best practice to bring them into a standard format. We're finding network types, industry roles, keywords. These are things that I think it was overdue for a look-see. So I think we have some really good work going on there. And then we've also identified several best practices that we believe need to be forwarded to the new Working Group 4 under cybersecurity, which, as we look at them, they fall out of scope for Working Group 7. So we'll be packaging those up, and Jeff will be sending those over to you to forward on to Working Group 4 for their review. And then finally, what's in progress is the best practice status review. And this is where best practices are marked now with whether they're critical, highly important, or important. And we're going to be taking a look at those definitions to see if they are still valid and to do any improvements that we can. Okay, so now I'm going to move into the second part here, and this is our manhole security interim report that I believe that was sent out to the council. The FCC approached Working Group 7 last year and asked us to consider an issue related to the security of manholes and how communication providers may be able to better expedite outage restoration following unapproved access and facility damage. This came from a manhole breach that occurred in San Jose, California in April 2013, and we were using that as a baseline to start our work. In this particular case, there were underground cables in a vault that were damaged in conjunction with some other activity, and that, again, we looked at that as a starting point for all of our discussions. And in this interim report, Working Group 7 examines and provides useful information, we believe, that will assist in better understanding this issue. And the report considers manholes that are used as part of the communication infrastructure. Now, we want to point out that we did not look at manholes for other sectors. We kind of centered on the communication. However, one of our recommendations will show that we believe the other sectors would be, I think it would help them if they were to take our report, go through it, and see if they could apply any of the findings. And finally, our report assesses ways that communication providers can expeditiously complete restoration requirements when events of this nature occur. So when we first looked at our scope, we said that Working Group 7 would be focused on security of manholes that are utilized by communication companies and did not contemplate other users of manholes. So our key points that we wanted to point out is that in manhole security, while this report focused on the issue of manhole security, it could as easily address the overall security of any of the outside plant components. How to strike a proper balance between physical security and the daily operation access of manholes was important. Physically securing all of the nation's manholes is very complex. It's a project riddled with numerous issues, including viable threat, vulnerability, and consequences. Physical security can deter intrusion into the manhole or vault, but the simple fact is that not all threats and vulnerabilities can be averted, and intrusion events will continue to happen. So through a combination of physical security, network management, and route resiliency, we believe a balance can be struck that will broaden the range of protection options available. So we looked at our strategy, and our strategy said, we believe that a strategy based on resilience fosters consideration of a broader range of options to help reduce the risks associated with the loss of critical infrastructure. So when we were looking at this issue, we came across our strategy being threefold. First is the physical securing of manholes. Now we reviewed the various types that we could identify, and we know that each method has advantages and also disadvantages, which can unintentionally reduce network resiliency if the method precludes easy, legitimate access when required. We also looked at asset protection. Now this is that we believe that communication providers have an inherent incentive to protect their assets. So we talked about in the paper issues of ownership and access of the manholes in the vaults. We also looked at the fact that underground to aerial, where you have an underground situation and then the cable comes up at any point on the route and goes onto poles, for example, or across bridges, across through tunnels, those types of things, that will add additional network vulnerabilities. We also think that we have to examine existing federal, state, and local laws about the placement of cables and about the placement of manholes. We know that there are customer service level agreements that come into play that require us under those SLAs to secure manholes in certain conditions. And we also believe that the real or potential threats and special manhole security needs to be addressed when you're looking at this issue. And the third part is network resiliency. Now, again, we believe that communication and emergency services are more defensible and more flexible when the critical infrastructure is not only physically secured, but when selective diversity is also implemented to provide resiliency to that network. Now, how do we do that? We looked at and discussed network components, which is your reliability item. We looked at route diversity, which is your alternate route issue. We looked at detailed plans for recovery, business continuity. How do you restore once you have an intrusion? And then finally, the consumer's responsibility for their own mission-critical circuits. So in our conclusion, in our paper, we concluded that when considering an outside plant intrusion scenario, whether it's related to manholes, utility poles, utility boxes, vaults, etc., similar security concerns exist. And when securing some geographical, if you're securing some geographical portion of the millions of manholes across the country, or even securing all of them, your network remains vulnerable. We concluded that it would generally be more coincidental that a mission-critical circuit would happen to be damaged on a facility than for an act to transpire based on real knowledge that there was a critical circuit on that cable. And we concluded that in the event of an act of intentional sabotage or terrorism, a determined person or persons would be likely to defeat any manhole cover security that was existing if the desire was strong enough. And the most common method of securing manholes in our investigation was through the use of what we call spot welding. And then millions of manhole covers are in place, and they've been so for decades. And none of these have experienced unauthorized access or vandalism. And as such, these locations do not need to be further secured unless a communication company becomes aware of a viable threat, issue, or concern, as we've outlined in the interim report. We also concluded that there are situations and reasons that a subset of manholes should be further secured. However, the communication owner of that manhole should be allowed to complete a risk analysis and determine which method is more appropriate for them. In situations where law enforcement and or internal security of your company identifies and presents a viable threat, cooperation by the manhole owners is warranted and encouraged in order to protect our nation's critical infrastructure. We concluded that in cases where non-communication utilities, consortiums, or municipalities operate the manholes that communication cables traverse, all parties are encouraged to follow some of the guidelines that we outline in our interim report. And in order for us to provide the highest level of critical infrastructure security, network resiliency is required. It can't just be tied to locking down the manholes. So our recommendations are to, one, Working Group 7 recommends that communication providers incorporate 6 current best practices as part of their resiliency design process, and these are related to diversity, resiliency, and so forth. And we list those here on the slide and also in the report. Second, we developed a new best practice that focuses on this issue. And we have determined, as all best practices should, that at least one communication provider does this function, which makes it a solid best practice. And our best practice recommendation is that network operators and property managers should consider additional security measures for critical infrastructure, utility vaults, and manholes when presented with a viable threat or recommendation by law enforcement and/or internal security. And we also then finally recommend that the CSRIC Council today approve our report and the new best practice so that we can get that placed online for use. I do want to point out one other issue on this. We did receive a couple questions and comments on our report after we sent it out. We will be addressing that in the document before it's published. The first was a question about what caused this, what made us believe that we should be looking at this, and that was the San Jose event. So we're going to be tweaking the report a little bit there. And then the second was a recommendation that the paper recommend that maybe a future CSRIC take a look at best practices maybe from other sectors and see if they could be adopted or adapted for communication users' use. So we're planning on tweaking that report a little bit, and we'll get a new copy out before publication. And then finally, just our next steps for Working Group 7. Again, we're going to continue working on best practices. We do have a September 14 deliverable that we will get done. We're still reviewing the ADIS NRSC recommendations as part of that. Still have our status definitions and prioritization work. And our next deliverable for this team will be September 2014, and we'll be ready for you. So I'm done, and I'll open the floor up for any questions. Over here.
Okay, thank you. My question relates to the best practices. I know with any best practices, when you do a you should make sure you incorporate people with disabilities.
We can't hear. It's not on the mic. It's not.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so my question in regards to best practices, are you planning to review any best practices that will impact people with disabilities, or that includes TTYs?
If they're in the group that we've identified, the 476, we're definitely taking a look at those. And then if we identify any gaps, that's another part of our work, is if we see anything that we need to recommend for new best practices in that area, we certainly would do so. We do understand and believe that is part of our responsibility.
It might be a good idea for me to possibly be a part of that group.
You'd be more than welcome.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. I'm sorry.
In the areas where you determined that it was not appropriate to have or to require a physical barrier to entry, tack weld on the manhole or a lock or something like that, was there any discussion as to the value of tamper indicators where you might not keep them from getting in, but you would identify that somebody was in and or did something to a component?
The only area there we addressed is in scenarios where the vaults might have electronics in them, where you would have the ability to physically put alarming back to a NOC center, network operations center, but we didn't address, like you say, like tamper strips or something where you could tell. I guess that didn't come up in our research when we were looking at it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Right, I'm out of here.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robin. We're going to try this again with the people on the line. I understand we've fixed the problem. Could someone just say hello from from the conference call?
Hello.
Oh,
Hello.
all right. Yay. All right, so now I'd like to get a vote from everyone. We're going to do, again, 2 votes, first for those of us who are here and then on the line. So for those people who are voting in favor of the Legacy Best Practice Update recommendations, if you could please raise your hand and say yay. All right, I think I saw all the hands go up. Nay? Any nays? No nays. Those of you who are on the line, anybody who has a negative vote, please say nay. Okay. Sounds of silence. Thank you, everyone. We've approved the recommendations for the Legacy Best Practices updates. Next on the agenda, I'd like to go to the NG 911. Is Brian and Lori? Brian, you're going to give both of you going to give the presentation? Okay, great. Do you have slides?
Brian, do you want to come up here and use the...
Pardon?
Do you want to do it
Do you want to come up here and just do them?
I could.
Okay.
So let's make sure I do the right thing. Great. I'm grateful to be here this afternoon. Lori Flaherty, my co-chair in Working Group 1, is on a work assignment in Philadelphia. And Lori, for those who know her, is a much more eloquent presenter than I am. So you're stuck with me. I'd like to just go through quickly some of the things that we're working on in Working Group 1. And on this first slide, and for those of you who can read these slides, I'd like the name of your ophthalmologist so you can see me afterwards. Over a year ago, the ADAS-TIA groups adopted a joint standard which deals with native SMS to 911 requirements and architectural specifications. This standard specified requirements in architecture and procedures for text messaging to 911 emergency services using native wireless operator texting capabilities for existing generations of 911 and next generation 911. The standard, however, leaves some areas for additional study, and that is really what Working Group 1 is all about. The first one is location determination. Working Group 1 is studying the technical feasibility for wireless carriers to include E911 Phase 2 location accuracy and information in text sent to 911 and make recommendations for including enhanced location information in text to 911. This report will be presented to CSRIC at our June meeting. The next area that we're working on is text to 911. Again, referring to the standard, the ADAS-TIA standard, this standard assumes that a PSAP will designate the text to 911 delivery method to the PSAP, including type of delivery method or an alternative PSAP and its methods that will accept messages on behalf of the PSAP, or the PSAP will indicate that the text to 911 is not supported at all. The ADAS-TIA standard does not provide a mechanism for supporting this functionality and indicates that this is an area of future study, and again, that's exactly what Working Group 1 is involved in. Additionally, in May of 2013, the FCC report and order on text to 911 establishing the bounce back requirements on covered text providers, the FCC requires wireless carriers to provide a mechanism for PSAPs to notify the carriers who want to temporarily suspend text to 911 service and to restart text to 911. So the working group is looking at recommendations and best practices, including testing and trialing, operational procedures and security requirements that wireless carriers, public safety answering points, and third-party service providers should allow in provisioning PSAP requests for text to 911 service. That report will also be completed during our June meeting, or approved during our June meeting. The third area is location accuracy and testing for voice over LTE networks. Current FCC location accuracy requirements under Section 2018H. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I always forget to do that. I'm not a big fan of slides, particularly ones you can't read. Permit network-based carriers to begin blending their GPS handset-based location data with their network-based data at different benchmarks between January of 2012 and January of 2019. The last CSRIC 3, Working Group 3, their report 2 years ago contained key performance indicators and the different types of empirical testing as part of the recommended maintenance testing every 2 years. The current working group in this CSRIC is examining whether those recommendations still apply for network-based carriers reconfiguring to voice over LTE platforms. This group is examining any necessary changes in the testing recommendations and will recommend cost-efficient measures to meet the current location accuracy parameters in 2018 of the Commission's rules. Also, the working group is examining the capabilities of voice over LTE reconfigured networks to provide enhanced location capabilities and consider methodologies to resolve the differences in opinions on location performance and yield referred to in Part 7 of the March 2012 report. Thank you. The next area is specification for indoor location accuracy test beds. In its indoor location test bed report, again done in CSRIC 3, Working Group 3, recommended that the Commission charter future stages of the test bed under the auspices of future CSRIC working groups in order to continue the assessment of the current and evolving location technologies. The CSRIC 3 Working Group 3 found that several cycles of testing at regular intervals are needed to support the rate of technology development, and that a testbed management structure with contractual authority that extends beyond the life of a CSRIC cycle will encourage ongoing technology development. The current working group is examining the requirements to establish a permanent entity to design, develop, and manage an ongoing public testbed for indoor location technologies that can provide the FCC with regular, comprehensive, unbiased, and actionable data on the efficiencies of location technologies. The working group will consider chartering requirements, including prerequisites for impartial testbed administration and maintenance of data confidentiality, types of entities that could assume the role as testbed administrators, technical requirements, scope and scale of necessary facilities and locations, permanent or contracted human resources to manage the testbeds, startup and ongoing cost requirements to maintain the testbed on an ongoing basis, and other considerations necessary to establishing an independent testing administrator. That will also hopefully be up in June. Now, the rest of, there we go. You're training me well. The rest of the information in these slides is just simply to give you a description of the working groups themselves and the sub-working groups. The working group, sub-working group 1, dealing with text and 911, has over 30 members. Subgroup 2, dealing with location accuracy and testing over voice over LTE networks, again, that has over 20 members. And subgroup 3, the specification for indoor location test beds, has over 20 members in that group. We represent everyone: carriers, public safety, 911, local, state, federal government, national professional organizations for carriers and public safety, location information technology companies, and public safety consultant groups. So we continue to meet. We meet on a fairly regular basis via conference calls, and we've actually had face-to-face meetings, and we will continue to have these calls and face-to-face meetings to meet our required deadlines of June and December. And that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Next update on wireless emergency alerts, Brian Joseph and John Madden.
Jeff, it's in PDF, not PowerPoint. Can we do that?
Does he need to come out? See, here I am causing trouble. Control L. Voila.
Control L.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the little technical difficulty, but glad we quickly overcame that. I'm Brian Joseph, and on behalf of my co-chair, John Madden, wanted to deliver this update. We have had really a great group, fully engaged with regard to wireless emergency alerting, looking at ways to evolve the technology, drawing on the experiences and the lessons learned since the rollout of wireless emergency alerts to the public in April of 2012. So we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of that. And looking at some of the technological advances that have occurred since the Commercial Mobile Service Alert Advisory Committee was convened in 2006, gave its recommendations with regard to technical characteristics for wireless emergency alerts to the public in 2007. The standards work, the development, the implementation by wireless carriers, as well as federal government partners, FEMA, the FCC, DHS, and certainly our alert originator partners, all in that effort. And the focus here is looking at other factors that may be relevant, may be appropriate for consideration in the evolution of wireless emergency alerts, and then come to the CSRIC with recommendations for any necessary changes. This may impact standards that are in effect, may impact the FCC rules that apply to those wireless carriers that have voluntarily elected to offer the alerts. And so we're looking into some fairly granular issues. As you see, the first 2 bullet points are the first 2 working groups, sub-working groups that have convened and are looking into some admittedly technical issues, geographic targeting, the message content and character limitation, also testing paradigms that go beyond the monthly test that's already in place by the federal government, the carriers, and as enshrined in the FCC's rules. Also looking at other potential types of alerts, looking at potential for audio or video capability, and then accessibility issues with regard to the alerts for those with disabilities and also for non-English speakers. So, and then ultimately security. Security pervades, I think, all of the elements that are highlighted above, but our intent, time permitting, is to engage in a separate sub-working group specifically looking at the security issues. So the approach, I mentioned technical issues, are very much in the focus, but want to emphasize that it's not just about the technology issues. We have a number of alert originators, federal, state, and local, who are participating on the working group, along with the other partners I mentioned previously, and looking at ways to prevent overuse, prevent abuse, but still enable the alerts to be functional, informative, and let people know to take action in imminent threat situations, as well as help law enforcement in instances of wireless amber alerts. So with that, as mentioned, we have 2 active sub-working groups out of a total of just over 30 people on the entire working group 2. We have some pretty substantial interest in each of the sub-working groups. We have 25 members actively participating on the testing sub-working group. We have 30 members on the geographic targeting, message content, and character limitation group. And so you can imagine that's it's placing some demands on the group, many of whom are participating on our full group calls as well as the individual sub-working group calls. But that said, I think we're making some nice progress. We've looked at generating user surveys on the testing working group. We reached out to 226 WIA authorized alert originators with a survey asking them a number of questions about their needs, their use cases for testing, and are also including third-party research in that vein. Carnegie Mellon, for example, and then certainly having subject matter experts. They've given presentations. We're having in-depth and detailed discussions. Certainly the conference calls are a regular part of the deliberations. And we anticipate recommendations in a report from the testing sub-working group for the June 2014 meeting, so the upcoming meeting. So the working group is engaged in reviewing the advisory committee recommendations from the SIMSAC, as well as standards issues and the standards in place, as well as the FCC's rules for the existing WIA testing framework. Looking at constraints to the existing routine monthly test and that process that's in the FCC's rules today, and then looking at the requirements, but also the expectations and outcomes for state and local wireless emergency alert testing. So taking into account considerations of how to operationalize, how to make sure that the alerts reach the intended areas, preparation, and certainly the responses from the public. So we're looking into a number of those issues I mentioned previously, the survey, the various other research studies addressing recommendations. Second sub-working group is addressing geographic targeting, message content, and character limitation. These are very involved, a fairly tall order, but have really been pleased with the engagement across all members of that sub-working group. And they have also incorporated federal government agency and third-party research into their discussions. We have a number of subject matter experts in this area, brought from all sides of the stakeholder community, and we are deliberating on weekly conference calls there. We anticipate that the recommendations from that sub-working group will be delivered for consideration at the September 2014 full CSRIC meeting. So that group is looking at enhancements to WIA since deployment. They're looking at alert originator needs, against the current and future technical capabilities, and that's where there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of careful analysis in order to account for public response, to account for the legacy technologies, certainly as we move into 4G technologies and future technologies, considering the opportunities as well as some of the limitations, and then what that means in terms of backward compatibility or legacy issues, and the implications on that for the public and consumer understanding, as well as for alert originators, and being aware that there's the potential for different alerts or different extent of alerts to be received or to be received in different ways depending on the device that citizen may have. And we're engaging in an evaluation of the message length options for the alert messages, geo-targeting options, and overall comprehensive mobile alerting concepts. So as I mentioned, we have a very strong representation on each of the sub-working groups. We have not yet launched the additional sub-working groups just to keep the burden manageable, but we are looking as next step to launch some of those additional sub-working groups to address the remaining study areas. Set to have another face-to-face meeting this spring. We'll continue with our weekly calls and continue providing periodic status updates to the steering committee and to the full CSRIC. Any questions?
As you're looking at the adoption within the user community, and more specifically the opt-out community, I've certainly, this is informed by anecdote, have heard more and more people opting out of the wireless alerts due to the odd times that they tend to be sent at. And I will admit, I'm one of them. Getting Amber Alerts at 11 p.m. when I'm trying to go to sleep is not something that I can be helpful for, so it's a cost without a benefit. Are we trying to understand why users are opting out and how we can keep them from doing so? Not technically, but by letting them want to be in the process beyond mere surveys, but actually measuring, from the device manufacturers, information of that sort?
So in terms of metrics, this group has not been looking at that. That's an interesting question. One thing that we have teed up is the notion of trying to get to the looking at device settings for different alerts. So having potentially more flexibility. So a user may say between the hours of 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. I don't want to receive an Amber Alert, but I would want to receive an imminent threat alert that could warn me of a tornado coming through in the middle of the night. So that's something that is under consideration. I will say that from the discussions that we have with alert originators, including the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is involved with the Department of Justice in the issuance of Amber Alerts, a lot of discussion, and this is potentially a broader issue than just our working group, but WIA outreach and education as a whole, sensitivity with regard to when and how broadly those alerts are disseminated. We've seen some alerts that have gone, through multiple states, and I think the training on the alert originator side has emphasized where there is a good cause and there's sufficient certainty to do that, or to do it at a later hour of the night or an earlier hour of the morning to do so. That said, there was an Amber Alert that went out at 4 a.m. in New York City, and that resulted in a successful recovery of a child. So I take your point, and I think what we are grappling with in kind of my references to the public response is a sensitivity to that. We absolutely don't want to see people opting out. If there are things that we can do to give a little more flexibility on user configurability of the device, that's something that we intend to explore. Thanks. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. You get an A for PowerPoint presentation that's easy to read, focused, and direct. Everybody take note. All right. Next item is cybersecurity best practices. Robert Mayer.
Thank you very much. I think it's probably better when you follow somebody who gets an assigned grade of a C+. So there's only one way to go here. But anyway, I want to, first of all, take some time to thank the chairman, thank the Admiral, and thank his staff for engaging industry truly for over a year in a discussion about this particular working group. As you know, we're somewhat off cycle. We're beginning this at this time because industry approached the FCC and suggested last year that given the important work and the significance of what we expected to occur at NIST, it made sense to delay the effort until that effort was completed, at least version 1, so that whatever we did in this environment was integrated and aligned with that effort, and they agreed. And I think that was a very important signal to us that we could work with them going forward. I also want to just take a little bit of a moment to put my thoughts around the notion of a new regulatory paradigm, because for our industry, the communications sector, we have been working in the public-private partnership for a long time, for decades. And in some cases, it goes back to the early days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we've worked with multiple agencies. We've worked in this environment with the public-private partnership. So I think in large part, the reason that we are considering a different regulatory paradigm is because of the success that we've had in the public-private partnership, and particularly our sector. I can tell you that we as an industry, and when I say industry, I am talking about wireless, cable, satellite, broadcast, and wireline, have probably never been more organized and never been more dedicated and never been more committed to working with government stakeholders on issues of cybersecurity in the context of a public-private partnership, and I think anyone who saw what we were doing in NIST for the last year would agree with that, and what we've been doing for years at DHS in the public-private partnership, and what we've been doing here in CSRIC. And one other statement I would say is that we totally get it that we have to succeed. And when I say we, it's not just the government, it's not just industry. We collectively have to succeed here. As a country, we have to succeed. As an industry, we have to succeed. And we have to find those opportunities where we can collaborate effectively and head towards a direction that's going to work and make sense. And I'll get into some of the details in terms of what are the things that can work and what are the things that we risk doing that might not work. So let me begin. I'm sorry for taking some time here. The goal here is to talk a little bit about background and perspectives, share with you the objectives of the Working Group 4, our planned approach, talk a little bit about the leadership and the membership, and then quickly on the status, and hopefully have some time to answer any questions. So on background and perspectives, I think I've answered the question about why now. It was very important for us to see the results of the NIST framework, and we think we're really well positioned now, although we have a very aggressive schedule, to take the NIST framework and to evolve it. And we did something in 2011, 397 best practices that had the characteristics of what I believe the Admiral, and I hope I'm right here, shared with this group, is that we're not looking for the 20 SANS security controls here. All right? We want to elevate this. We want to look at a process that is going to be effective, not only within the sector, but effective across the entire ecosystem and the value chain from a cybersecurity perspective. And that is a different effort. So we're in a process of transforming our approach to how we have traditionally looked at cybersecurity practices here. We're moving it up a level to be more process-oriented and more consistent with risk management. So the chairman made a remark about operationalizing the framework within the communication sector. Our term that I've used, which I don't think is a word, but it's to sectorize the framework. And we're even going beyond that. We're actually recognizing within our sector there are different industries that have different requirements from a cybersecurity perspective, and we want to acknowledge that and allow those industries and those segments to actually lead their effort with regard to this alignment activity. And the comment from the director of NIST, Patrick Gallagher, Dr. Gallagher, was that this has to work for organizations of all size and degree of cybersecurity risk and cybersecurity sophistication. So we've embedded in this working group capabilities that will allow for that to occur, to recognize that. So the objectives, pretty clear. Look at the most critical existing cybersecurity best practices. We have to work with something smaller than 397. We have to understand what are the most critical practices in light of the current threat environment. And we have to align that. We think there's great value in aligning that with the approach that the framework took, because the whole purpose of the framework was to have something that could look across multiple critical infrastructure sectors and create a common taxonomy and language, an approach that everybody could understand. So there are tremendous benefits in that effort to bring those two efforts together in alignment. We want to look at aspects of the business environment in which cybersecurity practices will be effective, efficient, and sustainable. And what that means is that if we're only focusing on technical standards, on the SANS 20 controls at that level, without giving consideration to the organizational tissue and what's required from a process perspective to effectively manage this process, we're not going to create something that's sustainable. And it'll give us a false sense of complacency, which we don't want. Barriers to implementation was something we did in CSRIC 3 as part of the Anti-Botnet Code of Conduct. I think it was very helpful for stakeholders and the community at large to recognize that organizations are at different maturity levels, they have different resources, they have different business models, they have different legal and regulatory situations, and therefore you can't do a one-size-fit-all solution, and there are unique circumstances and issues that those companies have to deal with, and not the least of which, one that we have to deal with, is the one around cost. The executive order clearly says that they're interested in a cost-effective framework. So we can't assume that all of these organizations have the same capabilities. And then we will produce a final report on March 15th. And it says here, for providers of all size and scope who may use the material to evaluate and improve their cybersecurity posture and communicate needs and expectations internally and external with internal and external stakeholders throughout the ecosystem. That was one of the foundational principles, I think, that was in the NIST framework, is that you want to have a way to communicate internally, which means across the organization, horizontally and vertically, and you want to be able to communicate externally to your external stakeholders, and you want to have common nomenclature and common understanding of what's required. So the approach as we anticipate it right now is that we will organize ourselves around the 5 segments of broadcast, cable, wireless, wireline, and satellite, recognizing that each one of these segments have common operating environments within their own industry, but it may not necessarily align exactly with the communications sector generally. So we're going to start with having teams of people, dedicated experts in each one of these areas. And by the way, this construct of the 5 segments is consistent with the way the Communications Sector Coordinating Council, through the CPAC effort, is structured within DHS. We have strong segment participation, and including, very importantly, we have actively seeked out representatives from mid-sized and small companies so that their perspective is completely integrated in the work effort of this group. So I think I've covered some of this already here. Talked about barriers to entry, barriers to implementation, talked about risk management. Here's another point that I think is absolutely essential and will be embedded in this work effort, and that is the notion of the ecosystem as it exists today, particularly as it affects our industry, the larger ICT industry, the regulatory environment, and the threat environment. And what is happening, and I think it's evident to everybody in this room and who's listening, is that there's been significant convergence in the industry between the communications and IT sectors. And that convergence is occurring at every level of the protocol stack. It's at the infrastructure level, the platform level, and the service level. And what that does is it fundamentally alters the balance of responsibilities among service providers, among content providers, e-commerce providers, equipment vendors, software and application developers, and end users. So we have to acknowledge that as we build the process here that recognizes that this convergence does not apply to, as I believe the chairman said, there are no longer any silos. There are services that are performed by members of my association that look identical to services that are performed by members in other associations who have no regulatory relationship with this agency. So we'll look at the dynamics of the ecosystem from a carrier ISP perspective to understand how the different communities can work together to support common interests and to consider the appropriate venues for such activity to occur. This is not in any way about pointing fingers. This is about sitting down and having a conversation about how do we collaborate, just like we've been collaborating for the last year at NIST and prior to that through the council work at DHS. So I believe the chairman or the admiral or both made reference to the talent that we have on this working group, and I'm humbled to be able to work with these people because they're exceptional. I've worked with all of them. The 5 segments will be led by Kelly Williams from the National Association of Broadcasters, Matt Tooley from the National Cable and Telecommunications Association, John Marino from the Cellular Telecommunications Industry Association, Christopher Boyer from AT&T, and Donna Bethea Murphy with Iridium and representing Satellite. A lot of the alignment work and consideration of the processes will occur in those environments. They will be supported by work that a gentleman who I met through the NIST effort, Jack Whitsett with EnergySec, has developed over the course of many years, which is an understanding that technical standards in and of themselves will not make us safer, that they have to be fully integrated into the culture and organization. So as we look at the processes and elevate them and think about what's going to work and think about what can be measured, Jack and his team are going to help work with the segments and work with the sector to make sure we have created a set of practices that work from the CEO level all the way down to the technical organization. We have Tom Soroka from U.S. Telecom and Brian Scapella with the TIA, Telecommunications Industry Association, working on the notion of ecosystem that I discussed before. And we have Susan Joseph from Cable Labs and Jesse Ward from the National Telecommunications Communications Association, working on issues that are of particular interest and importance to mid-sized and small businesses, and in particularly issues around cost and hurdles that they face uniquely. And then I'm really also very happy to say that people who we have worked with very closely for the last year and have reinforced all of the notions around public-private partnership and the value of the framework as being something that is voluntary and industry-led and prioritized and cost-effective are going to be working with us as advisors. If anything, to keep reminding everybody that the ideals and principles that are reflected in the framework have to be carried over into this effort here. So I'm very happy that Donna Dotson is going to serve as an advisor on this effort. Donna was the one of the top leads on the NIST effort. We've worked with her for a year, and we've seen what they can do, and we're looking forward to her involvement in this. And Samara Moore with the NSS is another person who we worked with closely for over a year, and who was very effective in ensuring, and I think will continue to be effective in ensuring, that one of the concerns that we had many years ago is eliminated, and that there is no duplication of effort, and that resources are expended very efficiently around cybersecurity across government venues. So the work at NIST, the work at DHS, the work at FCC should not be duplicative, it should be complementary. She will help us with that. And then Emily Talaga is an economist who I think will bring a lot of help to us with respect to understanding some of the barriers to implementation or use of the framework and best practices, and we'll work with the group to refine some of the work we've done earlier on botnets. We have 65 people on the team right now. We had, I understand, last week for the first meeting, 45 participants on the call. I think we have a very talented group of engineers, operations folks, policy people, who understand that at the end of the day, there has to be value for industry for them to use and adopt the capabilities of what we produce here. We have to ensure that there's value for industry, and we have to ensure that the government perceives value. And I think there is a common ground for us to discover where that convergence exists. The rest is all logistics. We're off to a good start. We've got a good infrastructure, I believe, around administration in place. We're firming up leadership and membership. We're going to be firming up the approach and the work plan, make whatever adjustments come up through the working groups. Schedule meetings, a face-to-face meeting. We've organized the leadership team. The subgroup working groups are being organized right now, and we will keep the steering committee and the council informed on a regular basis. Thank you for your time. I know that was a little lengthy. I'm available for any questions that anyone might have. A minus. We'll talk about that. I'm sorry? Yes.
Okay, this isn't a question, but I do have a comment. And my comment's going to be a little lengthy, so hopefully you can bear with me while I go through this. I do have a concern on the conflict between safety and accessibility. And I understand and completely understand the security issue and the safety issue, but what often happens when there's security issues for best practices and policies that then conflicts with accessibility requirements. And I just want to give you a few examples just to illustrate what I'm talking about. One example of that would be that some people who work for government agencies are people that are deaf and they use sign language to communicate. And so when they're required to use the telephone as part of their job duties, those people use something that's referred to as a video phone. And the video phone requires companies to open a certain port within the network to be able to support the video communication. And some agencies do that, whereas other agencies say that they're unable to open those ports. For example, NIH is unwilling to do that. So as an alternative, they've established a DSL line specifically for people to be able to use. And the FCC has done a similar thing. But that DSL line is 15,000 feet from the exchange point, which means that the speed deteriorates the farther that you are away, and so the video connection is actually quite poor. So for these people, it's hard to be able to do their daily job duties because of these security requirements that are in place. Whereas there's other agencies that have basically flat out turned them down and told them that there's nothing they can do to be able to use the phone. So how are they supposed to do their job? A second example would be with televisions and closed captioning. There are a lot of television, stations, obviously, that what they do is they use analog equipment. And that is bad for a couple reasons. First of which is the slowness of it. The second thing is that there is the increased risk for the errors within the transmission. And I'm not really sure why analog equipment is still being used. When asked about that, we're being told that the company's IT departments are concerned about security breaches, and that's the reason why they continue to use analog. And so I know with the recent order that's gone out from the FCC about closed caption quality, that is an issue that we have. So that is the point of my comment, is that we need to develop these best practices, but at the same time we need to be remembering the importance and considering those that are not necessarily part of the mainstream community and their needs as well with accessibility.
So I know that wasn't a question, but if I can take a moment to respond to that. And thank you for those remarks. And what I would suggest and welcome you is to be part of the working group effort so that we can make sure that those considerations are integrated in the processes that we develop. And we can talk about that and work with staff to arrange for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, everybody, we're going to take a 10-minute health break. It is, okay, let's all come back at 3, to be exact. Next item on the agenda is the server-based DDoS attacks. Peter Fanash and Michael Glenn. Yep. Are you here? Yes. Is one of them here? Oh, okay, good. Sorry. You were too quiet.
No.
We teach you all up there, right?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Dr. Pete Fonash and myself, or Michael Glenn, are chairing this working group. And I just wanted to make a couple comments. The chairman's comments at the beginning of this were actually very interesting to me personally. And I just wanted to talk about that because I believe it's really important for people to understand that this cooperative nature must go on. It's not a question of if it will go on, it must go on. Because otherwise we will have failure. It is that simple. And let me tell you a story or what's happened since the last CSRIC, since I've been here in the DDoS world. So we're talking about DDoS attacks. And since the last CSRIC meeting, there was a vulnerability published on NTP around the beginning of January that would allow a pretty large reflective attack to happen. So that vulnerability was published at the beginning of January after the CSRIC meeting. Then our adversaries weaponized that particular vulnerability. And in the February timeframe, We then saw reflective DDoS attacks, the largest that we've ever seen to date on the internet. Okay, reported in the media, reported attack sizes were in excess of 400 gigabits per second, which I might add is larger than any single carrier can handle. Let me just make sure we understand that. After that, those attacks have been mitigated by a cooperative effort among ISPs to deal with those particular attacks. So not everywhere on the internet, but in a lot of places, those attacks have already had mitigations put in place by major carriers to help prevent those attacks. And then we had another paper published at the end of last month, beginning of this month, on 12 other protocols, some of which we knew about, some of which we didn't, that will also act as a reflective media to launch similar types of attacks. So between the last CSRIC and this CSRIC, we have had vulnerabilities published and attacks that have exceeded the largest size that we've seen. Yeah. In some cases, that's correct.
Right. I mean, I fear that if we keep saying vulnerabilities, people will mistake what we're talking about. It's not. Right. In every one of the cases so far, it's functionality that the protocol delivers on purpose, and it's just because of other issues on why they're being utilized and exploited. There's nothing about vulnerabilities.
And that's a very good point, especially on the new protocols. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I just wanted to point that out, that activity is going on, and there's a set of cooperative activities that are happening that I don't think a lot of people have visibility to, that if those activities weren't happening in a cooperative state, we would have significantly larger problems on the internet than we do today. With that, let me give you a readout of our working group. So our working group's objectives are to examine and make recommendations to the council regarding network-based best practices and other measures to mitigate the effects of DDoS attacks, specifically around the large data center attacks and the hosting sites that specifically plagued the financial industry over the last 18 months. We have a wide representation of members that I've gone through before across industry and across government, and we are well represented, and we have very good participation among the members. We have taken the approach of breaking up into 4 working groups, best practices working group, and then 3 other working groups, an ISP, financial community, and internet security working group, to bring together experts within those groups that have developed use cases of real attacks that have gone on, and those use cases have been developed and are in a draft state right now. The best practices subgroup has pulled together the current best practices from CSRIC and other organizations, and we've compiled those best practices, and we're currently reviewing those best practices that I'll go into in a minute. So we are making very good progress, and we have good participation within the working group. We hold biweekly conference calls with all the membership. We also have alternate biweekly calls with the subgroup leaders around where those subgroups are at, and so we have good participation there. We reviewed, it says 600 here, 600 to 700 cybersecurity best practices, and narrowed those down to the ones that were applicable specifically to DDoS services. That was approximately 10 to 15% of the best practices out there. We are currently getting input from our different members, soliciting input on those best practices, what needs to be changed, and then we're asking the sub-working groups to look at their case studies and identify changes or gaps and practices that occurred based on those case studies in order to fill in the gaps for these best practices, and that's where we're at right now. I think we've talked about that. We've had one person-to-person face-to-face meeting already. We have another one scheduled in Denver, the 9th and 10th of April, where we'll bring the working group together. We also have conference facilities for the people who can attend. We are on track for a draft interim report to be presented in order to get feedback from the CSRIC committee on our draft report. In that report, though, we won't have barriers to implementations. We don't have enough time between now and when we have to deliver that report, but we do intend to include barriers of implementations for specific best practices in the final September report. As I said, the next steps, we're doing the review of the initial set of best practices and how they're related to the server-based attacks, and we're having all of the subgroups review it, and we're basing our work on actual case studies of real attacks that have happened across the constituents. We are finalizing the case studies for publication in our final report, in the interim and final report, I should say. We are starting. We have an outline for the draft report, and we're beginning to fill that in. We continue to hold the face-to-face and the biweekly conference calls to make sure that we continue with our progress. So that's an update of where we're at. So I think we're making very good progress. We have very good participation and collaboration among the variety of people involved with the working group, and I'm very happy with that. So with that, let me open it up to any questions anyone has. I think that's the last slide. Yeah.
Just a quick question. The chairman talked about, and many of the speakers have talked about the importance of the work we do being measurable. As you approach your task, is the group also looking at, well, how will we measure success?
That's a really good question as far as measurement of success in this particular area. We haven't dealt with that directly to date. What we're hoping to do is to get the best practices listed and then try to categorize whether those best practices have low impact or high impact, and the difficulty of implementation of those best practices, if they're difficult to do or easy to do, and then focus obviously in the high impact, low difficulty area to begin with, but then also focus on the high impact, high difficulty as a way to try to encourage carriers and other providers to implement those and to understand why there's problems with implementations. So if you ask me today, that would be my measure of success for it. The real measure of success ultimately is how well we're able to respond and defend against these attacks. And so that'll be pretty evident by whether we're successful or not within this space. But at the same time, our adversaries are changing on a daily basis, right? During the banking attacks, the attacks change sometimes every 20 minutes, right? The type of attacks and how they did it. So some of that is relative around mitigation of attacks and these new type of attacks that come up and can quickly become a major problem. It's how quickly we deal with those. And I should also say that this list of best practices have to be a very dynamic set of practices, because what we publish in our report, some of it will not be complete, and some of them could even be obsolete, in the next few years, depending upon the changing nature of the adversary and the attacks that we see.
Yeah, thanks, and I appreciate that. And I think it's important for that feedback loop to be whole, that as you identify barriers to adoption of a best practice, that there be feedback for, in fact, did the barriers get removed like you thought they were going to be removed through their identification, or was that work not effective, and do we need to look at additional barriers that kept a best practice from being adopted? It's measurement that would support that I'm really talking about.
Okay, great. I appreciate that feedback.
What's the scope of what you're looking for best practices? I mean, are you focusing solely on the network-based stuff, or are you looking at host-based, manufacturing, site-based? I mean, I'm not quite understanding, because you said you looked at 700 best practices, so what are you narrowing it down to actually to look at to offer as best practices for data center DDoSes?
Well, and so we've had a lot of discussion on that topic, right? And so we have to understand the scope of the CSRIC, and so we've tried to. So hear me out first. So you have to understand the scope of the CSRIC charter, right, and where we're at. And so our objective is around network-based practices, but also you see in there and other measures. And so we're trying to capture that in two ways. So our primary focus is around network-based practices that can be implemented. At the same time, because we have a large constituent of people on the working group, right, that have different viewpoints, what we're hoping to do is also capture hosting-based practices, right, and even victim best practices of what companies, for example, with a website can do on their website in order to mitigate some of these reverse DDoS attacks that we're seeing within that environment. But our main recommendations will be around network-based practices, but we hope to capture also the learnings in hosting environments and victims to capture those and include those in the report.
So the plan is to have more best practices than just BCP 38, right?
Yes. BCP 38 and BCP 84 are important tools, right, an important way to stop a portion of the attacks that occur, but can be very difficult to implement. So I implemented BCP 38 and 84 on our network in the early to mid 2000s. I have a lot of experience on what it takes to implement that and the effects that it can have. So yes, to your question, it will be broader than that one recommendation.
So thanks for bringing up the elephant in the room on this one, which is always BCP 38, and I'll come right back to that. First, I do just want to caveat, because we do keep mentioning reflective DDoS attacks, that those are not the only type of DDoS attacks. So for the council as a whole, people should be aware that while a lot of our oxygen gets spent on reflective attacks, there's a broader category of attacks that reflection defenses won't necessarily be sufficient for. That said, we've spent the better part of 2 decades now, almost now, talking about BCP 38, making recommendations about BCP 38. At what point should we be thinking more forcefully about BCP 38? And is that something that the working group is discussing, addressing, et cetera?
Well, so while we're on this topic, BCP 38 works well for single-homed customers.
I'm not single-home customers, so I'm very familiar with some of the pains it might have.
It becomes difficult for multi-home customers because implementation of actually BCP 84 requires that you then start dictating routing policies onto your customers, which they may or may not agree with, and may impact their particular business. And so there's a discussion that usually happens with every single customer as you try to implement BCP 84 on multi-home customers and the effect that that has on their particular agency or their particular enterprise. And I have personally had very large enterprises threaten to pull all their business from us because of our insistence on implementing BCP 84, because it doesn't directly benefit that particular agency or company on the implementation. It helps the internet overall, but it doesn't help that particular company and only really creates headaches for that particular company because of potential availability problems within the routing. So to your point, those technologies are important tools, right? And they can be very effective in large residential networks and other places to help prevent some of these reflective attacks. But they're not the silver bullet that will stop DDoS attacks in general. And even some of the new reflective attacks they may not even be effective for on the WordPress attacks that recently made the paper.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point to raise that. And what I would encourage the group to consider and give us advice on is their communication that the Commission could or should make to other regulators that cover the host side of things, at the, lower levels in the tier, that would impress upon them the importance and the value of BCP 38, and that is there, if we look at attack damping, right, is there an appropriate way to say, okay, for those of your customers that have invested in the ability to take advantage of your BCP 38 configurations, that they're over here, and for those customers that have said, no, it's not important enough to me to invest in that, that they're over there, that we really should look this year at a way forward that appropriately addresses this very important and potentially valuable security area.
And I would argue, although I can't back this up with statistics, but I would argue all the major ISP carriers have already implemented that years ago, quite honestly. I would be surprised if there were major carriers who hadn't implemented them within reason, right? Within reason, where it's most effective already. And so I think that discussion, we can certainly encourage them for the smaller ISPs and other ones to implement, but I think that the major ISPs already have and recognized long ago that that's an important consideration, right? And put it in place in the areas of the network where it's most effective.
Yeah, but help us understand the gap, because there's still a significant gap out there, and that gap often connects to the top-level domain, right? And this is an area I think that we need to shine a light on, and really have a better way forward that balances the very legitimate things that you said with the real need to be able to dampen the rapid propagation of attacks.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a great debate. All right. Next item on the agenda, long-term internet protocol improvements. William Check.
Thank you, and good afternoon. This is the Working Group 6 for long-term Internet protocol improvements. I'm going to jump right into the presentation and go to the third slide talking about the two subgroups. We have two subgroups part of Working Group 6. The first is in the DNS area. It's related to DNS spoofing attacks. The second is in the area of network routing, specifically for interdomain routing related to hijacking attacks and other problems. Looking at the DNS subgroup, its emphasis on what is known as DNS open resolver attacks, and for those of you who are not familiar with this, DNS has been leveraged as an attack platform primarily because it uses UDP, user datagram protocol, and anything UDP-based is susceptible to source IP address spoofing. So, for example, unless properly configured, a recursive DNS server, for example, in a U.S. network, may answer spoofed queries, potentially sent from overseas networks. DNS servers configured and responding in this manner are commonly referred to as open resolvers or open DNS resolvers and pose a significant threat. So these are vulnerabilities that we believe affect the entire Internet ecosystem, not just one portion of it. So a broad perspective of the issue is important. And in addition, recent reports have noted an issue of open resolvers involved with DNS cache poisoning. So there's other areas as well that the subgroup is investigating. So the mission of this DNS subgroup is to identify and recommend best practices for use by the Internet ecosystem, including ISPs, application service providers, and CPE vendors for mitigating these issues. The DNS subgroup has been busy working through these issues. The group is meeting on a bi-weekly basis, and in fact, some of you here in the room today are part of this Working Group 6 subgroup. The issue has certainly been around for a while, and the group began first by reviewing and analyzing the open resolver methodologies and approaches, and they're now developing some initial key findings. A recurring theme in the analysis and findings is, as I mentioned earlier, this is a problem for the entire Internet ecosystem. It involves all aspects of the Internet. So the subgroup is now developing a list of best practices. They're doing this by cross-mapping industry reports and recommendations to the group's initial findings. And as a result of this work, they've now identified and put together a draft initial list of recommendations. They're currently developing basically what I'd call an interim report that the group can review. That report will then be expanded for further vetting by the participants. As far as the next steps are concerned, the subgroup's going to be taking on the issue of a survey of past and present projects and activities. And the kind of questions the subgroup's going to be looking at is, how do you measure the progress and status of this issue? What are the available mechanisms that are out there, for example, in the Internet community? And are any of those feasible to use or adapt to this problem? So the group is looking at this in terms of the coverage, the methodology being to look at its current operational status, and ultimately will attempt to identify recommended methods for tracking progress, the goal finalizing a report by September. For the interdomain routing subgroup, the second subgroup's focused on the routing aspect of this. This group is also meeting on a bi-weekly basis. It's been very busy. They continue to review the Internet route hijacking incidents as well as CSRIC 3 recommendations to determine if updates are needed. However, the group is also looking at other vulnerabilities in this area beyond route hijacking. And those kinds of things include misconfigurations, other naive type of problems, and other kinds of brokenness. So they're looking to analyze methods and procedures to quantify routing anomalies and attacks. Part of this work is to describe practical steps for deployment of protocol extensions such as RPKI and the possible benefits for incremental deployment, and to develop methods to detect reachability issues related to the deployment of RPKI and other protocol extensions. As we look to next steps of this group, they cover several areas. The first is to characterize and analyze recent events, and the second is to survey past and present projects and activities. And as is the case with the DNS subgroup, this group's also looking at coverage of measurements, methodologies, and being able to look at current operational status. Looking at this a bit more closely, there's two types of events the subgroup is looking into. The first is the route hijacking events. Last fall in 2013, Renesys, who participates in this CSRIC Council, they posted a blog about targeted Internet traffic misdirection. The subgroup got a detailed briefing from Renesys. They're also a member of the subgroup. And they presented on their findings and plan to discuss this more in the final Working Group 6 report to provide more in-depth treatment of this issue. The plan is to give a more thorough analysis in the report, including whether current practices or current future practices would or would not help with this issue. Another type of traffic event is also being investigated. In January of this year, in what is known as the China Great Firewall, the firewall suffered a failure. And as a result, all the internet users inside the firewall, which in this case was up to 500 million people, were unable to load websites for up to 8 hours. And during this time, the firewall mistakenly was directing the country's traffic. In this case, the problem was thought to be a result of misconfiguration to the firewall. So misconfigurations and other problems that can cause brokenness are being investigated by the group. Certainly, this is a complicated area. The group is working on developing a taxonomy to develop references to different types of classifications of attacks and configurations, including terminology and types of events. There's been a number of different routing measurement projects that's been taking place, both past and present, and the group is looking to survey them. And here the group is asking, what parts of the internet ecosystem do they cover? Or what part of the problem space do they cover? What is their methodology? And what data sources do they rely on? In addition, when investigating this type of problem, the group's also looking at work done in the academic area and how applicable such work could be for an operational network. So the kind of work that has been developed from research projects are potentially interesting. If it looks promising, then there's a question, is there ongoing support for it? I like the bullet here I show on the slide that our subgroup chair put on the slide, that when referring to the status of such research work, he posed the question, could a feasible idea be sitting under a grad student's desk? So the group is looking at multiple ideas. Finally, a few comments about potential deployment aids. One potential approach is to better secure internet routing through the use of RPKI, the Resource Public Key Infrastructure. This initiative was developed within the IETF, the Engineering Task Force, with involvement from the regional internet registries and other groups. A recommendation from CSRIC 3 was to get more operational experience with RPKI. So the group is looking at the benefits and limitations of RPKI, what's needed to make RPKI workable, as well as the risks. For example, concerning risks, if there would be a misconfiguration of RPKI, how would it manifest itself in the network? What problems could it cause? So more practical experience with RPKI is being looked into. And for example, with ISPs, hosting operators, and enterprises, they all may take a different approach with RPKI. And then finally, the group is working to finalize their report by September. So that's our report on Working Group 6. Thank you very much.
Bill, before you leave.
Yeah.
CSRIC 3 did some very good, well-thought-out work regarding DNS security.
Yes.
There has since then been a reported poor uptake of that practice in other parts of the ecosystem. It would be useful as you look at the areas in your space to include the cleanup on CSRIC 3 to get advice from you on how the Commission might communicate to other sectors and or other regulators the importance of these things. And we can begin a little bit of interregulator dialogue on, hey, guys and gals, this is a team sport. So that would help if you gave us some ideas on how to remove barriers to implementation in other areas.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. That's very good feedback. Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, Bill. Next item on the agenda is submarine cable landing sites. Kent Bressy. Okay.
Pass it down. As long as we bring the cable with us, we should be fine.
This is past the PC.
Yeah, past the PC.
Otherwise, I'll break
As
this
long
up.
as the chair's there when I come.
I didn't want to take the job away from Laurie. I've never recovered from the fact that one time I told my boss, I said, gosh, I just broke the machine. He said, impossible. It's an idiot-proof machine. Whatever that meant. So, many years ago. Well, while we're getting set up there, my name is Wayne Pacine. I'm with the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. And I'd just like to say that Kent Bresci, if you're out there, it's probably a little past about 11:30 at night in Dubai, where he is, along with 5 other members of the working group number 8. So I asked myself, how come there weren't 6 members out there with him? But anyhow, so I checked the weather forecast before I came here too, and it was sunny and 85 degrees in Dubai today. So are we ready to go? Okay. So we'll go to slide 1. The overview for Working Group 8 is Working Group 8 is focusing on examining 4 key areas. The first is the submarine cable infrastructure itself. The second is the proximity to other marine activities. Third is the governmental permitting processes, which can literally take days, weeks, months to get a permit to do something here. And the fourth is the clustering of cable routes and cable landing stations. The second bullet here is something that, where I worked at the Federal Reserve Board, people say, is that really true? That the submarine cables carry approximately 99% of the U.S. traffic with the rest of the world. I've seen other figures, but every figure I've ever looked at has been in the 96, 97% range. So not to disparage anyone here from the satellite industry, but most of the people I work with think, what? We don't use satellites for that? No, we don't. We use the undersea cable.
I need to interrupt.
Uh-oh.
That's
Navy man here.
That goes another way often is a very important percentage. And if you're in harm's way overseas, you absolutely value the satellite industry.
Spoken like a true Navy admiral for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So Work Group 8 will recommend 4 key areas. We'll come up with recommendations in 4 key areas. The first is the separation standards between the cable landing stations and the cables themselves, alternative architectures for the design of the cable systems, governmental policies, and fourth, the interagency coordination and mechanisms required to make these systems more resilient. So the deliverables will come in 3 parts. Report 1 will be focused on spatial or separation recommendations that we would like to make. Report 2 will be looking at gaps, conflicts, and sources of delay in offshore permitting when things are required, either a new cable or repairing cable or whatever. And the third report will be focused on industry best practices and government policies for promoting geographic diversity of undersea cables. Next slide. There are 20 members of this work group. Like I say, roughly 30% of them are enjoying Dubai right now. I hope they're not checking the weather forecast around here for the next few days, because they might want to extend their trip for another week or so before they come back. Anyway, so it's a small group, but in the meetings that we have, I can assure you they're very passionate about this topic, and that's good, because I think we'll produce a very good product. We're very geographically dispersed all over the country, and so consequently all of our calls, meetings so far have been by conference calls, emails, and we have a very good SharePoint site. The last slide. So for the June meeting, when we come back here in June, Report 1 will focus on spatial separation. Report 2, when we come back in December, will report on interagency coordination. And then when we come back, I guess, for the very final meeting in March of next year, the The third report will focus on promoting geographic diversity. So that's where we are today, and I'll be happy to take any questions that. And I don't know if Kent, you dialed in from Dubai. Are you there, Kent? If he's smart, he's already gone to bed. It's 11:30. Okay. Any questions? Okay, that was fast and furious. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next item on the agenda, infrastructure sharing. Oops. Yep. Infrastructure sharing during emergencies. Jay Nalen.
Well, good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jay Nalen, and I have the honor and the pleasure of leading Working Group 9, Infrastructure Sharing During Emergencies. And we'll see if it works. All right, we're good, yes. So as our name implies, our working group is focused on identifying opportunities and developing best practices for sharing infrastructure during emergencies. The infrastructure we're focusing on are those assets that directly support or provide power and transport to our network facilities. Whether it's a natural or a man-made disaster, the result is often the same, and that's the loss of commercial power and transport, which cause large-scale network outages or wireless outages also. So in the following slides, I'll cover some of the more common issues experienced, our approach to address those issues, the work we've completed, as well as what lies ahead of us. So as I mentioned, large-scale disasters can and do cause widespread power outages and transport failure. So in an effort to battle those, wireless networks and other communications industry organizations, they go forth with monumental efforts to bring in facilities, assets, such as generators, fuel, cows, colts, and personnel to restore service to those networks. And these are the areas that we've focused on, as well as roaming. So on some instances, in some cases, it's also possible to roam or to share networks between carriers. And so we'll be looking at these assets, these issues, and the potential to develop best practices around those in the next few months and over the next few slides. So our approach, the first thing that we decided to do, just because of the vastness of the work that was in front of us, was to split it up into three categories. Well, first was the wireless carriers and the network. The second was the transport and backhaul. And the third was the backup power. And with each one of those categories, we developed a subcommittee that would actually lead and dive into those areas to look for areas of opportunity for infrastructure sharing. And so here's where we're at today. We have successfully developed the three subcommittees. The first subcommittee, which is the wireless subcommittee, is being led by Eric Woody with Union Wireless and Ernie Gallo with Ericsson. The backup power subcommittee is being led by Richard Zeno with Sprint and Cindy Perez with Cat5. The transport subcommittee is being led by Catherine Condello with CenturyLink and Joan Vaughn with T-Mobile. The subcommittees have done an outstanding job of identifying areas that we're going to tackle and focus on, and have accomplished a significant amount of work to date, which we'll begin to look at next. So the Wireless Network Subcommittee is farthest along with developing our first deliverable. Now we're hoping to put forth the final recommendation regarding roaming during disasters today for a vote, but in an effort to put forth our best work and to respect the time and consideration of the Council, we've postponed that until June of the next Council meeting in June. The submittal will include a proposed new best practice, as well as recommendations for hosting and governing the Roaming During Disasters Guide, which will help carriers streamline this process as they move forward or attempt to enable roaming. So the following are the next steps with solidifying this document or completing this document. So first, we want to solidify the proposed new best practice within the next month or by May 9th. We're also looking to find the home who's going to govern and own this document going forward. And to date, it looks like Addis has stepped forward and raised their hand and offered to help us develop that and own and govern that document going forward. And then finally, we're going to work on completing the roaming matrix and the contact list, which we'll look at. So an example of what that roaming matrix could look like is here. So maybe you can see, hopefully you can see, the document. It outlines carriers by state But it'll list which carriers are in each state. It'll also list which technology that they're using, the spectrum that they're using. And this document or this matrix would be used as a very quick reference. So if we see a storm moving inland, we can identify generally the area that it should be hitting landfall. We can quickly look at the matrix and identify which carriers are probably going to be impacted. And as a carrier, you're going to probably want to know which other carriers are in the area, what technology they have, what spectrum. That can help you start preparing for that potential roaming if it becomes necessary and is feasible and mutually agreeable. It would also help you understand maybe what requests may be coming towards you and start preparing for that. There's also the contact list that we'll be developing. The contact list will be finishing, I should say. The contact list will give you that first point to start those discussions. And that's being developed right now, and we would help Addis if they are going to govern that going forward to complete that. All right. So next we're going to look at our transport subgroup or subcommittee. So the transport subcommittee just held an in-person all-day meeting yesterday here in Arlington, and I was thoroughly impressed with the work that they'd put forward. So you can tell that there was a lot of work, pre-work done before the meeting, but the subject matter experts and the diverse topics that were brought in were pretty impressive. Amongst several of these areas, we had TSP, Next Generation, or NGN, GETS, WPS, was provided by Deborah B. of the DHS. Microwave Solutions and Potential Strategies provided by Joseph Marvin of the Global VSAT, of ComSearch. And Satellite VSAT Solutions and Strategies provided by Steve Birnbaum of the Global VSAT Forum. Dark Fiber Solutions, Strategies, and Potential Disaster Recovery Opportunities was provided by Rod Springs of Level 3. And Passive Optical Network Solutions and Strategies was provided by Sean Carroll of CenturyLink. So there was a great discussion. It was an all-day meeting. There's lots of work that will be coming from that, but there were some key areas that were identified that we're going to continue to pursue. What we called some shiny objects that we wanted to dig into and look at a little bit further, which may bear some fruit and provide some value. Next, we're looking at the Backup Power Subcommittee. So the Backup Power Subcommittee also has a lot of work, and there's been a lot of work behind the scenes that's beyond the calls that we've been having. I think a lot of what will come from that will benefit and ultimately will enable a lot of infrastructure sharing in the future. One of the areas the focus group is generator specifications, and that's being led by Steve Martin with AT&T. And really what that does is allowing us to see a truer picture of what's needed at the cell site locations from a power perspective. With that could, again, provide some additional value and a path forward as we look at infrastructure sharing of those generator assets in the future. Another area is site prioritization considerations, which is identifying a method of prioritizing sites for hardening and or recovery. The subcommittee is also looking into best practices for sharing logistical resources such as fuel. So I mentioned the fuel, the generators, the cows, the colts, the other assets that are being brought into the areas. Every carrier, other communications organizations are bringing in assets into the regions. There's duplicative work there. There's a lot of resources that could potentially be leveraged and shared, and so we're looking at opportunities to perhaps coordinate that or at least communicate and build awareness around what's coming into a region. And finally, the team is focusing on regulatory requirements or potential obstacles that may impede the deployment or recovery of the wireless networks and other networks. So the teams will continue moving this work forward through the following schedule. So as you can see, the subcommittees are meeting on a weekly basis. We're meeting as a full team on a monthly basis, the first Friday of every month. There's a lot of in-person meetings that are occurring. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes work that's occurring. We'll continue to develop the best practice document surrounding the roaming during disasters that I indicated. We'll have that done the next month. And then we'll focus on developing the rest of our requirement or our readouts and recommendations for our September deliverable. And that brings me to the end of our presentation. So I'll open it up for questions.
Jake, a question. In situations where the pre-deployment of cows and colts isn't possible because of lack of warning, like an earthquake or something like that, the ability to get cows and colts into position to really begin that restoral for the most critical parts of the networks is in hours to a day or more affair in some geographies. Is the group at all looking at UAS, aerial gap fillers that would allow us to restore a minimum part of the network to support first responders and other kinds of uses, or actually to support the community's, calls out to first responders. Are you looking at anything that would fit within that hours to minutes?
So we haven't looked at it yet, but I think that's a great opportunity for us to start diving into a bit further. We can look at that by next readout, I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jay. Okay, thank you, Jay. Next and last item on the agenda, CPE powering. Brian Allen.
Hi, good afternoon. Oh, we're good. Okay, I see that. All right, great. So our working group, we are tackling the topic of VoIP services and dependencies on commercial power, which, unlike legacy communication services, has impacts on lifeline services that users were once accustomed to. We have two deliverables. The first is recommending consumer outreach and communication strategies for making users aware of backup power features in their home adapters. And then two, recommending best practices for powering consumer devices during commercial power failures. Oops, sorry. We have a diverse working group. We've broken up into two different subcommittees. The first subcommittee is our outreach, which our outreach group. We have a fairly small group working on this. We are on target for our draft documents to be submitted to the council in early May. And the second best practices subcommittee is on target for providing the council our documents in early August. I appreciate the extension, Jeff. We had reached out. We had a slow start. So the consumer outreach status report, our working group, we have basically broken up this topic into three general strategies for backup battery power during commercial power outages. The first is developing a communication plan pre-crisis. The second is the consumer acting on recommendations during commercial power outages, and the third is post-outage analysis. Several of the items that we are looking at are elements of the communication plan, and we had reached out to several service providers to receive input, as well as several public utility commissions that have worked on this topic in the past. One is understanding CPEs, understanding their capabilities and what is actually in their premises, identifying if they do have battery backup or not, steps to build a plan if alternative power is needed, battery backup and alternative power life cycles, understanding those. 3, guidance on where to find the information, and providing a checklist to the consumers based on where they can find who their VoIP provider is. 2, if their equipment does have battery backup capabilities and the life cycle of those battery backup capabilities. Understanding energy use and its activation during a crisis, and guidance on understanding where battery backups could be purchased and maintained. And several considerations tied to that is one, what type of battery backup power could be purchased, how much to purchase, so walking them through a step-by-step process to understand their powering needs. 3, ways to conserve power, and guidance on how often battery backups needs to be charged, tested, and replaced. The communication plan will take into consideration best practices and considerations for individuals with disabilities as well. We're working on also, so during a crisis, providing some best practice and guidance for consumers during a commercial power outage. 1, consumers and how to determine when to switch battery backup on. 2, keeping in mind that battery backup has an infinite source, a finite source, that should be managed as one and providing guidance. And 2, considering VoIP services and is the VoIP service available so that they're not wasting their valuable battery backup. So providing some guidance on how they would find that information. And the third step would be post-analysis and providing some steps and considerations that a consumer should analyze when determining the effectiveness of their current strategy, as well as walking them back through the steps of should additional battery backup and resources, if those should be added. Our second working group is tasked for identifying best practices. We have reached out to multiple providers about and obtained various methods and procedures on different practices that are currently in use, as well as looking at additional best practices from lessons learned from other crises. We've identified 9 different use cases for how VoIP services are currently deployed in consumer premises. 2, we've outlined and configured characteristics of each of these use cases. We are currently using and reviewing methods and procedures related to installation, battery backup, grounding, and those have been received input from several communication providers. We're in the process of creating the document in drafts. We meet on a regular basis, so every other week. Both of these working groups are meeting, and we are on schedule to submit documents in early August for the council. Any questions?
I've got one. In the long run, long run, should we look at and we're in Internet of Things by then, and the refrigerator speaks to my doctor. Should we look at communicating to the folks who manage building codes so that backup power is baked in from the beginning for new construction projects? I think it would be useful if there's something that would be much more efficient in the way we do backup power in the future, if it was incorporated in the design of new homes and new offices or new buildings, that it would be good for us to communicate that so that we can ensure that the next generation is more prepared for this than we are in our bolt-on manner.
And I want to add to that. When you read about the vulnerabilities in the power grid, and I know we're thinking of backup power because it could happen at any time, and it doesn't take much. I find it amazing that kind of information is published to begin with, to be honest with you. Drives me crazy. It's like, let's just give them all a map, Google map, where all of our most vulnerable places are. And but anyhow, but I think that's a great idea to see if there's a way to start making that part of whether it's home building or building and just part of the normal way people proceed in the future, because that's a real vulnerability for our country.
Yeah, and we live in electronic houses.
Right. Everything doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you. Consider that.
So you said you've identified 9 use cases. That cover, and I'm wondering if that covers situations that might have a VoIP provider that's going through an open network, through the open internet.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm following.
Okay, let me give you an example. So let's say I sign up with Verizon for Fios, and then Verizon is also my VoIP provider. So let's say I use Fios, and then maybe I end up using someone who's not my ISP, and then I connect to that person through the open internet. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. So those are the use cases are fairly broad. They're not particular to pieces of equipment, and I think we're trying to encompass as many types of potential variables that we're coming across. And certainly, when the draft comes out, if it doesn't cover use cases that you're referring to, or other people have ideas, we'd certainly be open to that.
I know that you've already reached out to the National Association of the Deaf, because they did reach out to me, so I believe that they are working to make sure that everything is covered.
Great, thank you. So, thank you.
Thanks, Brian. All right, well, I would like to adjourn this meeting, but I'd like to thank everyone. Well, actually, Jeff, you're going to adjourn it, but I'd like to thank everyone for the great multi-stakeholder work and for the resulting recommendations today for the emergency alert system and legacy best practice updates. As your teams continue to work, I just want to remind everybody of the chairman, one of the chairman's requirements, and that is that he's looking for measurable recommendations with metrics. So just keep that in mind as you're all going along this road. I look forward to seeing everybody in June. Have a good next few months. Take care and very productive.
And I will add to that, these meetings are getting longer and longer, and I admire you for your tenacity and sticking with it and your attentiveness. So thank you for that. Thank you for all the work. Enjoy the spring, and we will see you here on. Well, it will be soon. It will be spring soon. It is spring. It's spring today, believe it or not. You said that right. Huh? So we'll see you here on June 19th, and if you're, was it the 18th? June 18th. If you're traveling, have a safe trip home, and we'll see you soon.